In the last video we discussed cost and healthcare, and found that Americans pay more money than the British for healthcare. If you're just joining at this section, I highly recommend you watch the first video. There'll be a link in the description along with all the references for this video. This time, I'd like to have a look at quality of care that you get under both systems. We are once again going to look at the UK and US, but also other countries with a variety of metrics, such as life expectancy, number of surgical complications, and infant death rate. 3 highly important metrics to use when discussing the quality of life. There are other metrics to look at, but these are the easiest to visualize and the most important to look at when looking at healthcare. Let's start with life expectancy. It stands to reason that the better a country's healthcare is, the longer the citizen's life will be. This is because in the global world where medical research is widely spread, the only real limiting factor is the quality of a doctor's skill, access to that research, and the money needed to apply to that understanding. In theory, you would expect a capitalist system to have more money, and thus should allow people to have access to a better quality of medical care. So in that case, you would expect the US to have a higher life expectancy than every other country, since it has access to the money, it has access to the research, it has access to skill, all of the important factors when discussing how good healthcare can be. So what does the average life expectancy look like across the world? Well, starting in the US, it's 79.11 years old across both sexes, putting them firmly at 46th on the list. 6 years above the global life expectancy, but below countries like Hong Kong, Spain, France, Germany, and the UK, all of which provide universal healthcare in some form or another. In fact, the vast majority of the countries above the US have universal healthcare. The difference between the US and these countries is very slim, about 2 years, but let's explore some truths. Access to healthcare means you're more likely to live into your later years. Poverty increases the rate of illness. The World Health Organization even states, the poor suffer worse health and die younger. So does it not stand to reason that putting up a paywall for access to healthcare is the reason why the US isn't higher on the list? Remember, they have everything else. They have knowledge, training, so the only thing holding them back is money. I said in theory the US should perform better since they have more money, but it's not the wealth of the nation that matters here, it's the wealth of the individual. So sure, the rich will cope just fine, but the poorest citizens, the people who are illest of health, those who need healthcare the most, are left behind. Under universal healthcare, everyone gets that cover. Now, Americans do give credit towards insurance if you're below a certain amount, or if you're disabled, or you're old, but it's never free. But fine, access to healthcare isn't the only cause of poverty. There are multiple. Access to transport, access to the internet, access to food and housing. These are all factors that can contribute to the cycle of poverty. But it can't be denied that access to healthcare does directly impact the level of poverty in the United States of America. Just imagine how long life expectancy could be in a country like that. 79 doesn't seem remotely close to the cap in my opinion. Let's move over to another metric, child mortality rate. Like with life expectancy, it stands to reason that the better the system, the lower the child mortality rate will be. We'll do this per thousand because countries differ in size, and using worldbank.org, who has collated all the data from the UN, which is nice and convenient, all in one place. Firstly, infant mortality has been on a rapid decrease over time. But once again, the US comes below other countries. And again, other countries with universal healthcare. Look, don't get me wrong, 6 deaths per 1,000 births is impressive. Really, really impressive. It's borderline to the point where it's not even worth discussing. It could very well just be a margin of error that accounts for the difference, since the UK has 4 per 1,000, same goes with France, and Germany has 3. The US doesn't trail behind that much, but marginal improvements mean massive changes for people's lives. My aim here is not to convince you that there'll be a massive improvement. My aim is to show you that the marginal improvement can be achieved with less money. The last metric we're going to look at is surgical complications. In theory, if doctors have a monetary incentive to do well in surgery, you might expect there to be less surgical complications. This is a really difficult metric to track, however, since definitions changed country to country. So because of this, we'll only look at two: the United States of America and the United Kingdom. Two vastly different systems, but two systems we've been comparing thus far. I'd like to look at more countries, but honestly, finding data on this stuff has been excruciatingly difficult, particularly when trying to time match them. If I were ever to look back into this, I would definitely expand the scope of this. I'd look at multiple different countries all around the world under different systems, all different types of universal healthcare, all different types of privatized healthcare. So what is a surgical complication? Well, as I explained before, it varies country to country, but in general, DK Sokol et al., and I have definitely butchered the pronunciation of that, defines it as any undesirable and unexpected result of an operation affecting the patient. I would imagine most countries use this vague definition, but the line and cut-off point will differ. Another major problem glaring us when looking at this metric is typically post-operative complications are recorded per disease, not it as a whole. So we're going to really just have to look at post-operative mortality. So again, this data is going to be extremely limited, and it's going to be very difficult to draw a conclusion from this. Additionally, I can't really use up-to-date statistics since 2020 has been a bit of a write-off in terms of healthcare for, I hope, obvious reasons. So we're going to look at non-2020 data. The Lancet in 2016 found that 7.7% of worldwide deaths came from deaths after an operation. So it is a reasonable metric to look at least. So let's look at the differences between the UK and the US. We'll start with the US. Between the years of 2008 and 2011, J.T. James compiled 4 studies and found that the mortality after surgery occurred about 1.4% of cases. In the UK, between the years of 2009 and 2014, roughly the same period of time, there were on average a surgical death in 1.1% of cases. One explanation here could be that total deaths have decreased over time, so starting it at a later date could potentially sway the results slightly. I would personally disagree here. I think that there is probably another reason for it. After all, you are looking at proportionality, so volume doesn't really matter, but ultimately that's your call to make. Due to the scope, I'm not really going to comment on which system is better in this regard. The aim of this video was mostly to present you with a set of data, to discuss that data, and then let you research it for yourself. I'm not going to change your mind by telling you verbatim what I think, but I hope I've given you enough to go away and make up your own mind. Healthcare is going to be a hot issue in the next 4 years, with Biden being in power. There is going to be a lot of misinformation travelling around, but it's safe to say that quality of care is something that you can't really definitively say which system does best. It is ultimately up to your personal opinion. But then again, maybe that's the point. If quality is so alike, then maybe quality isn't really what we should be worried about. After all, we've shown today that it isn't going to make it any worse, and at worst, it'll make it stay the same, but it'll cost a lot less money. And maybe that's the important thing. Or maybe it'll be the topic of our next video, longevity of the system. Either way, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it.